My name is Vincent Alderman, and I am 79 years old. 2 months ago, at my grandson's birthday party, I overheard my two oldest grandchildren, ages 12 and 14, referring to me, laughing quietly to each other, as the broke grandpa, a nickname apparently born from years of watching me arrive at family gatherings in the same worn corduroy jacket, driving the same 20-year-old sedan, never once contributing toward the more expensive family vacations or activities their other grandparents seemed to fund without hesitation. What my grandchildren didn't know, laughing about their supposedly poor grandfather, was that 6 weeks later, at their own school's annual fundraising gala, a painting would go up for silent auction, a small, unsigned-looking landscape that their teacher described, with evident excitement, as an early, rare work by a regionally significant artist whose paintings now regularly sold at major auction houses for six figures. The artist's name, quietly inscribed in the corner in a signature style few people recognized anymore, was mine. If you've ever been quietly underestimated by people who assumed your simplicity meant your limitation, stay with me. Because this story isn't about proving my grandchildren wrong for a careless nickname. It's about a lifetime spent choosing a particular kind of quiet, deliberate obscurity, and what happened when that obscurity finally, unexpectedly, cracked open in front of the people I love most. I need to tell you about my actual life before I tell you about that auction, because otherwise you won't understand why Broke Grandpa was such a profound, if entirely understandable, misreading of who I actually am. I attended art school in my early 20s. Back in the late 1960s, developing a genuine talent for landscape painting that several of my instructors, at the time, believed could carry me toward real professional recognition. I spent my 20s and early 30s pursuing that path seriously, showing work in regional galleries, developing a distinctive style that blended traditional landscape technique with a particular attention to light and atmosphere that eventually caught the attention of a handful of serious collectors, and gradually, a few influential critics. By my mid-30s, my work had begun appearing in more significant regional exhibitions, and a small but genuine collector base had developed around my paintings, people willing to pay meaningful sums for pieces that captured, in ways they found genuinely moving, particular qualities of light across mountain landscapes in the American West. I want to be clear that I never achieved the kind of broad household name recognition that some artists eventually reach. But within a specific, serious circle of collectors and regional art historians, my work developed real, lasting value, the kind that appreciates steadily over decades as an artist's total body of work becomes more clearly understood and more scarce. Here is the part of my story that matters most to understanding everything that followed. In my late 30s, I made a deliberate, considered decision to step back from actively selling and promoting my work, choosing instead to paint primarily for myself, for the pure pleasure of the practice itself, rather than continuing to navigate the particular pressures and compromises that came with maintaining a public, market-facing artistic career. This wasn't a failure or a collapse of ambition. It was, if anything, the opposite. A conscious choice to protect something I valued too much to keep subjecting it to commercial pressure, made possible by the fact that my earlier gallery sales, combined with careful disciplined saving and investing over the following decades, had already provided sufficient financial security that I no longer needed painting income to sustain my family. I took a steady, unglamorous job as a high school art teacher, a position I held for the following 31 years. Finding genuine, quiet satisfaction in introducing generations of young people to the fundamentals of drawing and painting, work that felt, in its own way, just as meaningful as gallery exhibitions had once felt. Perhaps more meaningful, given how directly it shaped young people's relationship with creative expression during formative years. I continued painting throughout those decades, privately, for my own satisfaction, occasionally gifting finished pieces to close friends and family members, but rarely selling anything new, and never actively marketing or promoting my ongoing work in any organized way. My earlier gallery pieces, the ones sold during my 20s and 30s before I stepped back from active exhibition, continued circulating quietly through the secondary art market over the following decades, occasionally resurfacing at regional auctions or specialized sales, gradually appreciating in value as art historians and serious collectors developed a more complete understanding of my relatively small but distinctive body of exhibited work. My wife, Rosalind, understood and fully supported this choice, having watched, during our early years together, the particular toll that navigating gallery politics and market pressure had taken on my relationship with painting itself. She used to say that watching me step back from active exhibition and simply paint for pleasure again was like watching someone remember how to breathe properly after years of holding their breath without fully realizing it. We raised 2 children together in a comfortable but genuinely modest home, driving practical cars, wearing simple, durable clothing, prioritizing experiences and quality time over visible markers of financial success, a lifestyle that reflected genuine values around simplicity rather than any actual financial limitation. Rosalind passed 4 years ago, and since then, I've continued living in that same modest home, maintaining the same simple lifestyle we always shared together, my daily existence giving almost no outward indication of the actual financial security built over decades of disciplined saving alongside the appreciating value of my early artistic work, most of which I'd never bothered updating my own children about in any detailed way, largely because the topic simply never arose naturally, and because I'd never felt any particular need to correct assumptions people made based on my visibly simple lifestyle. My son Gregory and his wife Kimberly have 2 children, my grandchildren Sophia, now 14, and Ethan, 12. Gregory grew up, of course, with full knowledge of my earlier art career, but as an adult, seeing me continue living simply and working as a school teacher throughout his own childhood and beyond, he apparently developed, over time, a general understanding of my finances as modest and constrained, an understanding he never had particular reason to question, given how consistently my actual daily lifestyle reinforced that impression. Sophia and Ethan, my grandchildren, grew up in a considerably more affluent environment than their father had, given Gregory's own successful career in software engineering and Kimberly's family's more visible wealth. They spent considerable time with Kimberly's parents, who maintained a genuinely lavish lifestyle, funding elaborate family vacations, expensive extracurricular activities, and generally providing the kind of visible financial generosity that Sophia and Ethan apparently came to view as the standard marker of a grandparent's financial standing, a standard against which my own quiet, unassuming presence at family gatherings inevitably compared unfavorably. I began noticing, over the past several years, small comments and observations from my grandchildren that revealed this developing assumption about my finances. Comments about my car, my clothing, my inability or unwillingness to contribute toward more expensive family activities the way Kimberly's parents routinely did. I never corrected these assumptions directly, partly because doing so felt, to me, like an uncomfortable kind of boasting, inconsistent with the values Rosalind and I had always tried to model, and partly because I genuinely didn't think the specifics of my finances were particularly relevant information for young grandchildren to be managing. 2 months ago, at Ethan's 12th birthday party, held at Gregory and Kimberly's house with a mix of family and Ethan's friends in attendance, I overheard Sophia and Ethan, standing near the dessert table, discussing the guest list for an upcoming, more elaborate birthday celebration Kimberly's parents were apparently planning to fund for Sophia's upcoming 15th birthday, a milestone celebration involving a rented venue and considerable expense. "Grandpa Alderman probably won't even be able to contribute anything toward it," Sophia said, not unkindly exactly, simply matter-of-factly, the way children discuss adult financial realities they've absorbed without much critical examination. "He's basically the broke grandpa, you know? Grandma and Grandpa Chen do everything nice for us, but Grandpa Alderman just kind of shows up in his same old jacket and doesn't really do much beyond that." Ethan laughed, not cruelly, just the easy laugh of a child amused by an observation he'd apparently absorbed as simple, unremarkable fact. "Yeah, broke grandpa. He's nice and everything, but he's definitely not like the fun grandparent financially." I stood near enough to hear this exchange clearly, holding a cup of punch, absorbing the particular sting of hearing myself categorized so plainly by two children I loved deeply, based entirely on surface observations that had never once been directly questioned or verified. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't primarily anger, though some sting was certainly present. It was something closer to a tired, familiar recognition of a pattern I'd noticed building for years without ever fully addressing it, combined with a quieter grief that Sophia and Ethan's understanding of my worth had apparently narrowed entirely to a comparison against Kimberly's parents' more visible financial generosity. I didn't say anything in that moment. I finished my punch, returned to the party, and spent the rest of the afternoon watching Ethan open presents, carrying this new layer of quiet hurt alongside the general warmth of the occasion. The same way I imagine many grandparents absorb similar moments without ever fully addressing them directly with the grandchildren involved. What happened next emerged from an entirely unplanned set of circumstances, a convergence I couldn't have orchestrated even if I'd wanted to. About 6 weeks after that birthday party, Sophia and Ethan's school held its annual fundraising gala, a significant event for the private academy they attended, involving a silent auction of donated items and artwork to raise money for the school's scholarship fund. Gregory and Kimberly attended, along with Sophia and Ethan, and I was invited as well, given my status as a grandparent of current students, though I'd attended similar events in previous years without much particular incident. This year's auction, I later learned, included a small painting donated by a local collector who had recently passed away, part of an estate that included several pieces the collector's family had chosen to donate to various charitable causes rather than sell privately. The painting, a modest landscape depicting early morning light across a mountain valley, had been included in the school's auction catalog with a brief description noting it as an early work by a regionally significant American landscape painter, provenance verified, estimated value considerable given the artist's currently limited surviving early period work available on the market. I hadn't seen the auction catalog in advance and had no idea, arriving at the gala, that any of my own early work might be included among the items on display. I discovered it entirely by accident, wandering through the silent auction displays with Gregory before the formal program began, when I recognized, with a jolt of genuine surprise, a small painting I hadn't seen in person in nearly 4 decades, a piece I remembered painting during a particularly productive week in the mountains outside of Aspen, sometime in the early 1970s, before I'd stepped back from active exhibition. Gregory noticed my reaction before I'd said anything. "Dad, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Gregory," I said slowly, "that's my painting. I painted that in 1974. I sold it to a private collector shortly afterward and never knew where it ended up." Gregory's confusion was evident. "Wait, Dad, you're an actual artist? Like a real one, whose work gets auctioned at things like this?" I explained, as briefly as the setting allowed, the outline of my earlier career, the gallery exhibitions, the collector base, the deliberate decision decades earlier to step back from active market participation. As I spoke, I noticed Sophia and Ethan, who had wandered over having overheard part of the conversation, listening with expressions of genuine, dawning confusion. The school's development director, overhearing enough of our conversation to understand something significant was unfolding, approached and confirmed, with evident excitement, the painting's estimated value based on recent comparable sales of my early work at regional auction houses, a figure considerably higher than Gregory, Sophia, or Ethan had any reason to expect, given their existing assumptions about who I actually was. "Wait," Sophia said slowly, looking between the painting's small placard, which included my full name, and me directly. "Grandpa, this painting is worth that much money, and it's yours? Like you actually painted it?" "I did," I said. "A long time ago, before I decided that teaching and painting quietly for myself mattered more to me than continuing to sell and exhibit publicly." I watched Sophia's face move through a rapid, visible sequence of confusion, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like vertigo, the particular disorientation of realizing that an assumption you've built casually, without much scrutiny, has been entirely, fundamentally wrong. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "I called you the broke grandpa at Ethan's party. I didn't think you could hear us. I'm so sorry. I had no idea any of this was true." I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, watching my granddaughter's genuine mortification unfold in real time. Part of me felt a certain quiet vindication, but a larger part felt something more tender, a recognition that this moment, however striking, wasn't really about proving anything to a 14-year-old who had simply absorbed and repeated an assumption without ever having reason to question it. "Sophia," I said gently, "I did hear you, and I won't pretend it didn't sting a little in the moment. But I want you to understand something important. I've spent decades deliberately choosing not to advertise or discuss my earlier career, partly out of genuine humility, and partly because I valued the quiet, private version of painting I eventually chose more than whatever recognition came with the earlier, more public version. You didn't do anything wrong by not knowing something I never told you. What matters more to me than this painting's auction value is that you understand grandfathers, and people generally, often carry entire histories and depths that aren't visible on the surface, and that assuming you fully understand someone's worth based on their car or their jacket is usually a mistake, regardless of whether it happens to be proven wrong as dramatically as it was tonight." Ethan, standing nearby, spoke up. "Grandpa, can you tell us more about your painting? Like, actually show us how you did it sometime? I had no idea you could do something like that." That request, more than the auction discovery itself, felt like the genuine turning point of the entire evening. In the weeks since, something has shifted meaningfully in my relationship with both grandchildren. Sophia has asked, more than once, to see more of my current, private paintings, the ones I've continued creating quietly for myself over the decades since stepping back from public exhibition. Ethan has started coming over on Saturday mornings, learning basic painting techniques directly from me, showing a genuine, developing interest that has become one of the great, unexpected joys of my remaining years. The painting itself sold at the auction that evening for a sum considerably higher than its estimated value, once several attendees learned the artist himself was present in the room, generating significant additional funds for the school's scholarship program, an outcome that felt, to me, like a genuinely fitting resolution, given my own decades of valuing teaching and quiet contribution over public recognition. I don't tell you this story because I want sympathy for an old man called Broke Grandpa by careless children. I tell you this story because I want sympathy for an old man called Broke Grandpa by careless children. The people in our lives, especially young people still learning how to see beyond surface impressions, will sometimes build entire narratives about our worth based purely on visible markers like cars and clothing, without ever asking the deeper questions that might reveal a fuller picture. That doesn't mean our worth depends on eventually correcting that narrative with some dramatic reveal. It means dignity and depth and an entire unseen history are often quietly present, waiting patiently for someone curious enough to finally ask. I spent years being quietly categorized as the broke grandpa by grandchildren who simply never had reason to question that assumption. It turned out a painting hanging quietly in a stranger's collection for nearly 50 years, bearing my own name in the corner, was worth more than either of them had ever imagined, and more importantly, it opened a door to a part of myself neither of them had ever known existed, a door I'm grateful, now, finally got the chance to open. If this story reminded you of someone in your life whose actual depth and history you might not fully know, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight.